Mendon was well aware that his brother would be angry with him, but his curiosity had complete reign of him now. Besides, it was all Achilles' fault, truly, and Achilles, at least, should have known better. There was a good 9 years difference between the surviving sons of Diomedes, enough that in some ways, the pair might as well have been considered other than brothers. Odysseus often acted more like Mendon's uncle or, indeed, their father. In fact, from what Mendon could vaguely recall of his sire, combined with what Cyrus, Tibian, and a few elders had told him over the years, Odysseus could have passed for Diomedes' twin, in both look and manner. Mendon shared some of his brother's features, but was half a foot shorter than Odysseus and, while strengthened by the necessities of farm life, was not nearly as mighty either. His countenance was narrower and longer from his mother's side, he was told, and he had eyes that were black and glistened like dark jewels. From where those had come, no one in the village could say, but Mendon had learned early on that, if he stared, he could unsettle most anyone save his brother and the man now with him. "What do you make of it?" Achilles muttered from behind. Mendon forced his gaze from the hunter's fascinating discovery. Achilles was a blond, wiry figure nearly as tall as Odysseus. Unlike Mendon, who was clad virtually identically to his brother save for the darker shading of his tunic, Achilles was dressed in a green and brown outfit consisting of jerkin and pants that allowed him to blend well into their present surroundings. He had soft, leather boots designed for padding as silently through the woods as any animal. His slim frame hinted of his swiftness but belied his strength. Odysseus' brother had tried to string and fire the great bow that was Achilles' pride and joy, tried and failed. The hawk-faced archer was not just the best at his craft among Sarum's inhabitants, but at least in Mendon's estimation, superior to many a hunter elsewhere. He had watched Achilles' match skills against veteran guards from passing caravans and never had seen him lose. "It looks ancient," was all Mendon could finally answer. He felt some embarrassment. Even Achilles had noticed that, but the hunter nodded as if listening to a sage. Although more than half a decade older than Mendon, he treated the youngest son of Diomedes as if Mendon were the font of all the world's knowledge. That was one of the few points of frustration between Achilles and Odysseus, who saw little practical use in most of his siblings' learning, but did at least tolerate it. "The thing is," the archer ran a hand through his thick, almost leonine mane, "I've been through this area many a time, and I swear that it's never been here before." Mendon only nodded, his attention once more upon his companion's find. Achilles had an eye such as he could only envy, Mendon's own vision often forcing him to peer close at parchments in order to make out the words he so cherished. And at this particular thing, he peered especially close, for the symbols etched in its face were, in many places, worn almost clean away by weather and age. Some of them he could not have made out even if his nose had been pressed against the stone. Clearly, the object before him had suffered long the effects of nature, and yet, how could that be, when it had, by Achilles' declaration, only just appeared? Kneeling before it, Mendon estimated the dimensions, just over the length of his foot on each side of the square base, and, had he been standing, a hand's breadth below his knee, the flat top was roughly half the dimensions of the base. In size alone, the stone carving should have been impossible to miss seeing. He touched the ground before it. Nothing of recent change in the surroundings. No. Mendon traced his fingers almost reverently over some of the more legible symbols. Legible only in that he could see them, not understand them. One prominent marking seemed to loop in and around itself, giving it no end. As Mendon touched it, he had a sense of incredible age. He involuntarily shook his head. Not age, Odyssean's brother thought, but agelessness. Mendon's mind paused at that sudden notion, never having conceived of it before. Agelessness. How could such a thing be possible? The stone was black, but the markings glittered as if silver. That also fascinated him, for they did not appear to have been painted so. The skill with which the entire thing had been carved bespoke an artisan far more sophisticated than could be found in Sarum or even in any of the larger settlements in the entire western region. Belatedly, Mendon realized that Achilles was shaking him by the shoulder. He wondered why. What? The archer leaned warily over him, his brow furrowed, deep in concern. The moment you touched it, you seemed to still. You didn't blink, and I'd swear you didn't breathe. I did not notice. Mendon was tempted to touch the artifact again, fascinated to see if the same thing would happen. However, he suspected that Achilles would not like that. Did you touch it earlier? There was a noticeable hesitation. Then, yes. But the same thing did not happen to you, did it? Achilles' complexion went pale with memory. No, no. Then, what? Did you feel anything? I felt an emptiness, Mendon. It reminded me of death. As a hunter, the blond man dealt with death on an almost daily basis, usually because of the animals he killed, but occasionally because of close scrapes with wild boars, cats, or bears, where for a time he became the prey. Yet, the manner in which Achilles spoke of death now gave it a new and far more ominous connotation, one which, oddly, stirred further curiosity, not fear, in the heart of his companion. What about death? Mendon asked almost eagerly. Can you describe it better? Was it? Achilles' expression suddenly guarded, cut him off with a sharp slash of his hand. That's all. I went for you right after. Clearly, there was much more involved. But Odyssean's brother did not push. Perhaps he could slowly gain the information over time. For the moment, he would satisfy himself with the stone artifact. Mendon seized a small broken branch and scraped the ground near the bottom edge. The mysterious relic appeared to be planted deep in the soil. But how far? Was there more beneath the surface than above? Again, the temptation came to touch it, this time grabbing hold with both hands in order to see if he could move the piece at all. How much more useful it would be if Mendon could take it back to the farm so as to study it at his leisure. Mendon's head shot up. The farm, Odyssean. He leapt to his feet, startling the generally unperturbable Achilles. The stone's discovery seemed to have upset the archer in a way Mendon had never seen before. Achilles was known for his fearlessness, but now he seemed to look to Mendon for reassurance. Certainly, a first. I have to get back, he explained to the hunter. Odyssean will be wondering where I am. Mendon did not like disappointing his older sibling, even though Odyssean would not have shown any such emotion. Nevertheless, Mendon lived with the memories of the terrible burdens Odyssean had taken on with the sicknesses and, later, deaths of their loved ones. The younger brother felt beholden to the older for that reason, not to mention many other, lesser ones. What about that? Achilles grumbled, gesturing at the stone with his bow. Do we just leave it like that? After a moment's consideration, Mendon replied, we shall cover it over. Help me with it. The two of them gathered loose branches and bits of leafy shrubbery. Yet, although they quickly had the artifact hidden from sight, Mendon felt as if it still stood, naked to the world. He considered covering it further, then decided to make do with what they had already done. The first opportunity he had to return to it, he would. As Mendon focused on the path back, he belatedly noticed that the weather had taken an odd and very sudden turn. The day had been fairly clear and bright before, but now clouds began to gather in earnest to the west, as if in preparation for a major storm. The wind had also begun to pick up. "That's odd," murmured Achilles, also evidently seeing the change for the first time. "It is, yes." Odysseus's brother did not understand the wind and weather in terms of hunting, as his companion did, but rather in measurements of currents and such. Mendon constantly saw the aspects of farm life in such terms, and while Odysseus, who knew weather only in how it affected his crops and his animals, constantly shook his head at his brother's ways, he could not deny that once in a while Mendon had come up with some idea that had helped ease their tasks a bit. The clouds rapidly thickened. Mendon said nothing more to Achilles about the strange weather, but at one point when the archer moved a step ahead, Odysseus' brother glanced back in the direction of the stone, glanced back, and wondered. Odysseus, too, noticed the peculiar shift in the weather, but chalked it up to one of those quirks of nature to which a farmer had to grow accustomed. He hoped that Mendon would return soon from wherever Achilles had dragged him. Even then, it was likely that the two brothers would have to make part of the journey home in the rain. The sudden accumulation above hinted at a particularly powerful storm brewing, but Odysseus hoped that perhaps it would hold for a time before unleashing its full force. If he and Mendon could at least make it past the low fork, where the trail often flooded, then they would be all right the rest of the way. Hands clutching the reins, he sat on the wagon eyeing the direction in which Cerinthia had indicated the pair had gone. Both Mendon and Achilles surely had sense enough to see what he did and react properly. At least, Achilles did. As he waited, his mind drifted back to a face framed in gold. Even though Odysseus had seen her only 2 brief times, he knew that he would not soon forget the vision of her. It had been due to not merely her beauty, memorable enough by itself, but the manner in which she had talked and acted. There had been that about the noble woman that had instinctively made Odysseus want to protect her as he had no other. Not even his brother at the time of their family's deaths. Lilia. The farmer ran the name over and over in his thoughts, savoring the almost musical beauty of it. The sky rumbled, finally jarring him back to the present. Recalling Mendon, Odysseus stood up in the hope of getting a better view. Surely the two had to be almost back in Serum by now. A flash of green caught his attention, but not the green that made up part of the hunter's woodland garments. Rather, it was an emerald green that instantly caused Odysseus to jolt to attention, his brother and friend utterly forgotten. Lilia slowly strode into the woods beyond, leaving the safety of the village. From her passive expression, it seemed very likely that she did not even notice the potential threat from the sky. In this region, the storms could suddenly grow so vicious as to uproot trees without warning. Leaping down, Odysseus secured the wagon, then headed after her. Although the farmer mostly ran after Lilia out of concern, excitement also filled him. He had no illusions about his chances with one of her blood, but at the same time his heart pounded at the thought of at least speaking with the noble woman again. Odysseus caught sight of her again just as the wind doubled. Despite the worsening conditions, Lilia still appeared not to notice. Her lips were pursed and her gaze was fixed groundward. Despite the swift pace Odysseus kept, he did not manage to catch up to her until well into the woods. The towering farmer started to reach out a meaty hand, then thought better of it. He did not want to take any chance of frightening her more than he had to. Whatever weighed on her thoughts clearly weighed heavily. Seeing no other option, Odysseus cleared his throat. Lilia straightened sharply, then looked behind her. "Oh, 'tis you," Forgive me, my lady. A shy smile immediately came to her lips. I told you, I am Lilia. What I once was, I can never be again. As his expression turned to one of confusion, she added, but what do I call you, Sir Farmer? He had not realized that he had never introduced himself. I am Odyssean, son of Diomedes. A rattle of thunder reminded him of their current circumstances. My Lilia, you shouldn't be out here. There's what seems to be a fierce storm brewing. Best if you seek shelter, likely in the tavern. It's one of the strongest of buildings in Sarum. A storm. She glanced skyward and for the first time appeared to register the change. The clouds had thickened to the point that day had almost turned to night. Daring her disdain, he finally took hold of Lilia by the wrist. There doesn't look to be much time. But Lilia instead turned her gaze in another direction, and a breath later let out a small gasp. Odyssean followed her eyes, but saw nothing. Nonetheless, the noble woman stood frozen, as if whatever had caught her attention shocked her senseless. Lilia, what is it? I thought I saw. But no. Even when he stood next to her, the farmer could see no cause for her alarm. Where is it? What did you see? There. She pointed at a particularly dense area of the woods. I think. He was tempted to simply take her back to Sarum and return after the storm, but the intensity of her reaction made him worry about what lay out there. Mendoan suddenly came to mind. Mendoan, who was still missing. Stay here. Odyssean started forward, at the same time drawing his knife. The brush thickened and at times the wild grass rose as high as his waist. How Lilia had seen anything was beyond him, but he trusted that this was no wild goose chase. Then, as he neared the area in question, Odyssean's hackles rose. A sense of dread rushed over him, nearly causing the stalwart farmer to backtrack. A faint but sickly scent wafted under his nose. It brought back memories of a plague, of his family. Odyssean did not want to take another step closer, and yet he did. The sight before him made the farmer fall to one knee. It was all he could do to keep his last meal in his stomach. His knife slipped from his hand, utterly forgotten in the face of the horrific revelation before him. What had once been a man at least? From the height, Odyssean decided it must be so lay strewn across the patch of ground at the base of the first trees. His entire torso had been expertly sliced open, much the way the farmer would have done to a cow after slaughter. Blood soaked everything in the immediate vicinity and had turned the dirt in some places to crimson mud. Part of the victim's own stomach had poured out of the cut, and flies already clustered over the tremendous, stench-ridden bounty. As if cutting open the body had not been terrible enough, the throat had been slit open sideways, the gap large enough to admit a fist. The face was covered with blood from the wounds, and leaves and other refuse decorated it like some bizarre festival display. After a long study, Odyssean finally determined that he did not know the man, who was roughly his age and with black hair, now caked with gore. It was what remained of the shredded garments that finally identified the unfortunate figure for the son of Diomedes. The robes' coloring alone was sufficient in itself, but the symbol of the missionary's order left no doubt whatsoever. Odyssean had found Brother Caligio, the missing acolyte from the triune. A gasp from behind startled him. He spun about to see Lilia, eyes wide, taking in the awful sight. She suddenly went pale. Her eyes fluttered upward, showing only whites. And then she began to fall. Pushing himself to his feet, Odyssean managed to catch her just before she could strike the ground. He held her prone body for a moment, at a loss what to do. Someone had to be told about the murder, likely Captain Tiberius, chief of the Sarum Guard. Dorius, the village's leader, would also need to know. In his arms, the noble woman moaned. Aldesean decided that, first, he had to take care of Lilia. Fortunately, it took little effort for the towering farmer to carry her. Aldesean moved at as swift a pace as he could without risking his precious burden. He had to watch his footing at all times, fearful that one false step would send both of them crashing. It was with great relief that Aldesean reached the edge of the village. The sky continued to thunder loudly, but the storm so far held back. Aldesean. He stumbled at the sound of his name, nearly tossing Lily away in the process. The farmer managed to steady himself, then looked to the source of the call. A great fear lifted off his chest as Mendon and Achilleos came rushing up to him. They had clearly just arrived themselves. Mendon was slightly out of breath, and Achilleos had a pale expression that the elder son of Diomedes suspected mirrored his own. Even though Achilleos could not yet know about the grisly discovery, as the pair came up to him, he immediately growled, "There's a body out in the woods behind me." Near where the forest first thickens. Eyeing the farmer's burden, the hunter muttered, "An accident." "No." Achilleos grimly nodded. He pulled a bolt from his quiver, notched the bow, and without hesitation went off in the direction Aldesean had indicated. "What of her?" Mendon asked. "Who is she? Is she harmed in any way?" "She fainted." Aldesean felt unusually anxious. He kept hoping that Lilia would awaken, but she remained a limp bundle in his arms. "She saw the body, too. Should we take her to Jorelia?" Jorelia was Saram's healer woman, an elderly figure some believed half-witch, but who was respected by all for her skills. It was she who had given the brothers the herbal mixtures that had at least eased some of their stricken family's agony. To both Aldesean and Mendon, she had done far more than all the prayers combined. Aldesean shook his head. "She just needs to rest. She must have room at the boar's head." He hesitated. "But we can't bring her through the front door like this. There is a back way near the steps leading to the upper rooms," Mendon said with far more calm than the situation would have warranted for most other people. "You could take her through there while I go and speak quietly with Tibian in order to find which one is hers." His brother's suggestion made perfect sense. Aldesean exhaled gratefully. "We'll do that." Mendon studied him for a moment, perhaps reading deeper into his brother than Aldesean preferred. As far as the younger son of Diomedes was concerned, Lilia was a perfect stranger, yet clearly she was not so with Aldesean. Rather than explain all now, Aldesean hurried on. A moment later, Mendon caught up. They spoke no more, intent on their efforts. Owing to the inclement shift in the weather, they were not hindered by any startled passers-by. That both pleased and frustrated Aldesean, who wanted Lilia safely in her room but also wanted to let someone of authority know about the acolyte's heinous slaughter. He finally satisfied himself with the knowledge that Achilleos would certainly contact the guard or the headman. Mendon left him as the pair neared the boar's head. Slipping around the back, Aldesean found the other doorway. With some manipulation, he managed to get the noble woman inside without losing his grip on her. Once inside, he wasted no time heading up the wooden staircase. Fortunately, most eyes in the tavern section had turned to his brother, who had apparently timed his entrance to coincide with Aldesean's. As Aldesean raced up, he heard Mendon greet a couple of those seated with a slightly louder than average voice. At the top, he waited. After what seemed an eternity, his younger brother finally joined him. "She had no quarters," Mendon explained, "so I had to arrange for some, with our credit. Was that all right?" Aldesean nodded. He looked at the 5 doors. "Which?" "This one," his sibling replied, pointing to a lone door, farther from the rest. "More private. With a look of grim approval, Aldesean had Mendon open the way for him. This being Sarum, the room was fairly austere. Other than a frame bed with down, comforter and a table and chair near the single window, there was no furniture. There were hooks on the wall for cloaks and such, and a space for a traveler's bag or trunk. Mendon noted the last before Aldesean could say anything. She must have belongings with the caravan. Shall I go to Serenthia and take care of it? While he hated involving Cyrus's daughter in this situation, Aldesean could see no other choice. Go ahead. Mendon paused at the door. Meeting his brother's gaze, he asked, "How do you know this woman?" "We met by chance," was all Aldesean would return. After a moment, Mendon finally nodded and left the room, gently placing the noble woman on the bed. The farmer paused to look at her. Again, he was struck by the perfection of her face and wondered what could have sent her wandering alone in the world. Certainly, Lilia could have found a good marriage with many a wealthy noble. Was she related by blood, perhaps, to one of the losing mage clans? That might explain the matter. As he pondered this, her eyes abruptly opened. Gasping, Lilia bolted into a sitting position. What happened? Do you remember the woods?" Her hand went to her mouth as she stifled another gasp. "It was all true, then. What I saw." Aldesean nodded. "And you brought me here." "Where is here?" "The Boar's Head. It's the only inn in Sarum, Miss Lilia. We thought you likely had a room here." "But I do not," he shrugged. "My brother took care of that. Then we brought you up here. After that, Mendon went to retrieve your things from the caravan." She stared long and hard into his eyes. "Mendon and your brother, they are the same person, I gather." "Yes." The noblewoman nodded to herself, then asked, "And the body?" "A friend is looking into it. He can be trusted to deal with the matter properly. Achilleos will alert the guard, then our headman." Lilia drew her knees up to her chin, then hugged her legs, that she badly wrinkled her elegant gown. She did not seem to care. Was the man we found also a friend of yours?" "Him?" Aldesean shook his head. "A damned missionary from the temple of the Triune. His companions were looking for him earlier. He considered they came with the caravan." "Did you?" "I saw them, yes, but never spoke. I have little trust in their teachings, or that of the cathedral, for that matter." This admission, so near to his own thoughts concerning the two sects, inexplicably lightened Aldesean's heart. Then the farmer quickly berated himself. However much his calling repelled Aldesean, the man had not deserved such a monstrous sentence. Thinking of that, Aldesean knew that he had to go and see to the situation. As the one to initially come across the dead missionary, it behooved him to tell the village officials what he knew. His brow arched as he considered the noble woman. He would avoid speaking of Lilia as much as possible. She had already been through too much. "I want you to stay here," he commanded, inwardly stunned that he should talk to a lady of high past so. "Stay here and rest. I have to see those who'll deal with the body. You needn't come, but I should be there." "Should I not?" "Only if necessary. You merely saw what I saw, after all, and you didn't know him, either." She said nothing more, but Aldesean had the clear impression that Lilia knew that he risked his reputation by protecting her soul. The noblewoman leaned back on the bed. "Very well. If that is what you wish, I will wait until I hear from you." "Good." He started for the door, already formulating his explanation. "Aldesean." He looked at her. "Thank you." Face flushing, the farmer exited. Despite his size, he moved silently down the steps. At the bottom, he glanced into the tavern. Everyone he saw acted as if nothing was wrong, which meant that news of the corpse had not yet filtered inside. Achilleos could be thanked for that discretion. Sarum would be in shock soon enough. The last murder having taken place more than 4 years ago, and that due to a drunken altercation between old Onius and his stepson, Gimel, over farming rights, with the latter coming out the loser. Once sober, Onius had pleaded his guilt and had been driven off by wagon to the great city to dutifully pay for his deeds. But the butchery Odyssean had witnessed had not been due to strong drink. This looked more the work of some madman or beast, surely an outsider, some brigand passing through the region. Growing more certain of this with each breath, Odyssean vowed to bring it up the moment that he spoke with the headman and the guard commander. The men of Sarum would be more than willing to volunteer to search the area for the bastard. This time, the crime would be handled locally. A good strong rope would end the matter as it should. It was all such a fiend deserved. He opened the back door and slipped out. There. That is the man of whom I speak. Odyssean retreated into the doorway, startled. Before him stood Tiberius, a beefy man against whom the farmer had wrestled during festival events, and lost too, more than he had won, and gray-haired, vulpine Dorius, who was staring at Odyssean as if never having seen him before. Behind them stood more than a dozen other men, most of them from the guard, but also Achilleos, and the 2 other acolytes of the temple. The older male was, in fact, the one who had spoken, and now stood pointing accusingly at the perplexed farmer. Recovering, he looked to the hunter. "Did you tell them everything?" Before Achilleos could answer, Dorius interjected. "You're not to speak to him, hunter. Not yet. Not until all the facts be known." "The facts are known," declared the Trion's emissary. His female companion nodded over and over as he spoke. At the moment, there seemed nothing pious or peaceful about the pointing figure. "You are the one responsible. Your own words brand you. Confess for the sake of your soul." Odyssean fought to keep his distaste for the acolyte from overcoming his reason. If he understood the man correctly, then the farmer had just been accused of the very murder he had been trying to warn them about. "Me, you think I did it? By the stars, I should take you and Odyssean," murmured Achilleos anxiously. The son of Diomedes regained control. "To the archer," he said. "Achilleos, I told you where to find the body. You saw my expression," and he halted, not wishing to join Lilia. "And you know me, Dorius. You were friends with my father. I swear by his grave that I'm not the fiend who so foully slew this jabbering fool's comrade." He would have gone on, but the headman waved him silent, his expression stern. Dorius replied, "Des not him we speak about at the moment, Odyssean. Nay, we speak of the other. Though it might very well be that we'll need to be returning to that before long, as I don't believe in no coincidence." "Other? What other?" Captain Tiberius snapped his fingers. Instantly, half a dozen men whom Odyssean had known from childhood on moved to surround the farmer. Achilleos tried to intercede. "Dorius, is this necessary?" "This is, Odyssean. Your words respected, young Achilleos. But this is duty." The headman nodded to the man in the circle. "I'm certain that it'll all be working out, Odyssean. Just let us do what the situation demands." "But for what?" "For possibly murdering a man," grunted Captain Tiberius, one hand on the sword at his side. Odyssean had seen the guard commander carry the weapon only a few times in all the years he had known him, with all but one of those being for the aforementioned festivals and other special events. The lone exception had involved the murder of Gimel. Shaking his head, the farmer roared, "But I told you that I didn't slay his companion. It's not him we're talking about, Dorius declared. But it's one of a similar calling, which makes this worse. Young Odyssean. It's the one hailing from the cathedral of light who's been found slain. The one, Odyssean trailed off, his thoughts in turmoil. But I just spoke to the man a short time ago, less than an hour, if even half that. Spoke to the man, and threatened him in the process, before several witnesses. You recall him, I see. Yes, young Odyssean, the honored emissary of the cathedral, was found with his throat cut open. And 'tis your knife jutting out of the gap, made